I went from feeling like, hey, I can do this to like, oh my God, I kind of feel like a god. There was something that the community was asking for that I was dragging my feet on. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to give this a shot. The fact that I can write a spec and it can build this thing for me is like freaking amazing. You actually could build a full end-to-end product without needing to pay someone for your database or even the programming language, any of that. My first reaction was like, this is totally amazing. That's the right product. There's nothing in the market that actually does that.
All right, Aviel, thanks for coming today.
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk to you about Foundations, your background, but also what you've built for Foundations in the past couple of months. It's been like an incredible journey for finding this community, but also like building this tool that actually helps you to eliminate some of the work you're doing for the community. So maybe we can start with a little bit of like where you're coming from. I know you've been a software engineer for a while, but like what happened after that?
I graduated college during the beginning of the Great Recession. So 07, like no jobs are out there. Like lucky for me, I had been working actually professionally since high school as a software engineer. And I absolutely fell in love with just building. And I continued doing that in college. That's where I got, my money to spend on things. And I spent all of college building websites. So to make a long story short, I wound up in Seattle being like, I want to be a software engineer and I probably want to start a company. I didn't know anyone in the Bay Area. I went to a startup weekend. It was like 200 people all get together. And then in like Microsoft style, it's like, now let's break up into departments and come up with ideas. And so then the next thing I know, it was like, okay, now we have we pick an idea and like now it's the executive team meeting. And I show up and it's a bunch of these like local CEOs of companies, like CTOs, like well-connected people. And I'm just like, hey, I'm Aviel. Like, who the hell is this guy? But so to make a long story short, that really immediately turned into a job at a company called Aperture. I totally fell in love with like writing software that wasn't just shit that was hacked together, but actually solving hard problems. And so I learned a ton over those 2 years, and then ended up founding a company called Simply Measured. We originally founded as Untitled Startup. I still own untitledstartup.com. The only thing we knew we were going to do was essentially solve people's digital marketing problems and figure it out. I had the privilege of going just from me and my best friend in a coffee shop to, at our peak, 150 people, over 20 million in revenue, working with some of the biggest brands in the world. But through that journey, I realized that I didn't like being a manager of managers. I love 0 to 1. I was spending all my nights and weekends working with Founders Co-op, which was the fund that wrote me my first check, and was also running Techstars Seattle at the time. And I had the privilege of being as part of the selection committee of that. And so I figured, look, if I start another company, I'll be successful and then I'll hate my job again, or I won't be successful and I'll hate my life. So how do I Peter Pan myself and stay in the 0 to 1 forever? And I was lucky enough that the timing worked out right when we sold my company. I got to join Founders Co-op as the second partner because one transitioned out, and I got to take over a Techstars program. And I immediately went from like, I'm a software engineer turned founder who like is still deploying code like begrudgingly to most of the engineering team. They're like, dude, you got to stop doing this at some point. To kind of overnight, now I'm just a full-time VC and I'm running an accelerator program and let's go.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you've been out of code, like building company for almost, I guess, 10 years?
I think probably the last line of code I deployed would have been 2016. So yeah, call it 9 years from that.
And how did Foundations come to? Because we, it's like we started it last year, and then always been like a huge success in a local community. But I'm curious, like that perspective of you building in the space, being a founder yourself, and then seeing this gap. I'm curious, like how did it form in your head?
The initial impetus of it was this would have been not last year, but the fall before. COVID's over, things are back to in person. I'm spending time in Seattle. So Techstars wasn't around, I even though it was around, it wasn't the same thing it was. Like I love spending time with early stage nerdy technical founders who love building and have no idea what they're doing. Why do I love that? Because that's sort of who I've been my entire life. And now that I've gone through this journey, I can actually be there to help them. And so I decided, I was like, hey, I want to mentor. I want to meet people. And like, frankly, at that point in time, while Techstars was still running in Seattle, those were not the people that it was attracting. Like those people just that were there a decade earlier, maybe they're in YC, maybe they're just starting companies. They just weren't there. But where they were is, and you should know this well, they were at Cloud Zero, which was in the Techstars office some of those days. And so I started meeting some folks out of that. Like I met you as part of that, and I got into it from a portfolio founder, Tyler, and started feeling like, whoa, like something kind of rhymes with not just in a way of like these people still exist, but it really reminded me of when I was just starting my career. There was the space that we had in Seattle in the middle of what's now Amazon campus that had, it was co-working, it had Techstars running out of it, but it was informal, man. Like Joe Heitzberg, who runs AI Tinkers, he founded, built, and sold a company out of that co-working space without ever actually being a member or paying the co-working space. He would just like come hang out, do that, like take meetings, like that was totally the vibe. And part of what was so magical then was, and I know this is really hard to believe, but it was the rise of cloud. Like cloud suddenly existed and nobody knew what are best practices, what are we doing? Open source was a real thing. Like you actually could build a full end-to-end product without needing to pay someone for your database or even the programming language, any of that. Suddenly there was a new business model called SaaS where, and there was, you had, PayPal didn't have recurring billing, but there were new like companies to help you like a layer up the stack, like Braintree. Like it was an amazing time, but nobody knew what they were doing, but everyone was building together. And what I was seeing in that group, in that community, was the same thing was happening again. It was just being sparked by LLMs, where everybody is building differently, thinking differently. Like there's some energy, there's something that's happening. So that all is there. And then you sort of need a spark to get it going. Techstars pulls out of Seattle in the most ungracious fashion possible. They sort of spit on everyone on their way out. They also tell the whole Cloud Zero group, like, even though the space is empty, you can't use it anymore. You watch as Y Combinator is returned to in person. Gary takes back over. Like the world is turning back on, and we're just up here in Seattle, like, I'm gonna go on a hike and ski sometimes. Like everything's fine. Like, what are we like? What are we doing? And so for better or worse, I think probably a lot because of the Techstars piece, people started reaching out like, Aviel, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do? I'm like, nothing. I'm not going to do anything. Like, what are you talking about? But I mean, the rest from here, which is that we all started talking, you as one of the organizers of that group. And I was like, hey, maybe there's something crazy we could do here. And I don't know if you remember, like the first revisions were like, they were kind of nuts. They were like insane ideas, but what we anchored on was like, hey, look, like I've got the networking connections. If we can get a physical space where we can take the people who are those builders that we just discussed, the people who are currently heads down building their company and are realizing like, shit, I shouldn't have gone fully remote, which I have data on that because portfolio companies kept saying like, hey, can I come into the office? Can we use your office? Like, can we come in? And then those people who were attacking my inbox saying, now that Techstars is gone, how do I give back? And what do I do? Let's all put them in one place and let's see if something happens. And so like fundamentally the goal was, how do we make Seattle a less shitty place to be a founder? And that's where it came from.
Do you think that things improved in the past year?
I was reflecting the other day that it's wild that this did not even exist a year ago. And I think you can talk to just about anyone in Seattle. Plus, I think the amazing work that they've done at the AI2 Incubator and AI House has fundamentally changed the fabric of the startup ecosystem here. So yes, I mean, it's sort of, it's a cheat because we didn't set out with a goal to say, this is what we're trying to accomplish. I mean, we really said like, if people don't want it, we're not going to force this to exist. Like we're purposefully not even going to have a business model. We're just going to take money from people who want this to exist and say, we're going to try something and figure it out as it goes, because we don't want like, man, like what happened to Techstars essentially was like, why are we running this program anymore? The original Techstars in Seattle was because there was no legible way for the community to come together, those three different groups that we talked about. And Techstars provided that, and it created the fabric of what that first wave of the tech ecosystem was here. And then over time, it was like, well, what does this thing do now? Like, why does it exist? And it was like, well, I guess it exists to fund early stage companies. And it's like, but why it versus these other things that do that as well? And like, you sort of keep existing, and that being gone created space. And I was like, let's fill the space, but let's also not like put up sharp elbows and be like, this is our space, this is what we do. And constantly just be thinking about, are we providing value? Should this exist? If it should exist, in what form should it exist? And just keep going like that. It's such a ridiculous thing, because isn't that like how the best founders and builders actually build things? They're not like overly obsessed with like, this business model metric must be achieved, this must happen. It's just like, you get excited and you do things, and if people like it, you keep doing it.
And you iterate and then you change things so here and there, but incrementally, like you end up somewhere where community wants it to be.
Yeah, and I think like I view my job at this point is I'm the steward of that, which is, if I am coming up with here's where I think the community should go, I've done something wrong. My job is to be, where does the community want to go, and how do I make sure that we don't f that up?
Yeah, and for the background, like Foundations has almost 300, I think, members at this point. There's like different tiers, but it's pretty much open space. Anyone can come in, work anytime of day, and just hang out with different other founders and like learn a lot about how they build in companies, especially in AI right now. There's so much happening every day, every week. So like sharing that experience in physical space is so important.
Well, I mean, I think it's a cheat code that you get naturally in the Bay Area because just of the density of everyone who's working on the same things, which is that you don't have to be intentional about staying up to date on what I should be doing, knowing what platform, what framework to use, what's the right way to do this, what's the wrong way. And here we've created a saturated community of people who get excited and want to share that with you. So it kind of provides that same value. Like, I mean, and this has ended up being like an overwhelmingly technical community. Like even if you're the CEO, you're still technical in here. And that was not on purpose. It was just sort of like, let's see what's the most valuable and where this takes you.
Yeah. So you've been running most of the operations at Foundations for almost a year right now. And I remember like we all been like very scrappy, like doing things that don't scale. But I think eventually with some point where you figure out like, okay, because we have very limited budget where like we can't really hire people. And I'm curious, like if you like looked into software, maybe like you wanted to buy something or like you found something that fits our needs. But there's a lot of like different processes that I think members want to get some benefits, like some mentorship. But I'm curious, how did like you start thinking about, okay, maybe I should actually vibe code it myself?
I'd say step one is I did the same thing that everyone does, which is like, okay, I guess this is sort of a co-working space. So like what software is out there for co-working spaces? And you know, we lose money, we don't make money. And so I'll quickly say as a caveat, we do now, if you are a Foundations member company, we had some people graduate that start hiring employees, and the rules are they can't have key cards here. And so we actually got a second floor of the building and they can rent desks and private offices. So like, turns out we actually do have a co-working space, but stuff was ridiculously expensive. It didn't fit exactly what our needs were. And the first thing we were looking at was actually like room reservations. So I was like, we're gonna punt on this. And I think the good news is I was right. Like we still haven't fully built that out, but I was like, we're gonna skip that for now. And I was like, I'm just going to do manual work. I'm going to copy and paste all the emails in every week for the weekly email. Like literally I'm doing that like totally manual. But there was a moment that broke me where I found that there was something that the community was asking for that I was dragging my feet on. And I think everything that I've built, that has become like the moment of, because I'm very much not a like, build it just in case is like the pain needs to be so acute that you do it. And so the first thing that really crossed that bar was office hour scheduling. So we do not have a project manager. And I remember or program manager, whatever you want to call it, when we were running Techstars, we had a PM and we did these 2 weeks of mentor madness where you're just moving all these calendars together, rescheduling, like it was so much work. And for me, I'm like, man, just doing any of this is going to be really hard. And I don't want to hire someone, like that's not enough of a job. So at any rate, it was like, what do I do with this? And I was like, oh, maybe I'll just, I'll schedule it myself. So it's like, it could be okay. And after the first one of them, where the person who scheduled was like, I'm actually going to be 2 hours late. Can we do it? And I was like, nope, like this is horrible. And for what our exact need was, there really wasn't like a great software solution because a lot of things assume that everybody's under the same domain or under the same, rules, access and all of it. Here's like everyone's different companies, the people who are coming into mentor, some of them are members of Foundations, some aren't, like, what is it? And so I essentially looked at it and said, okay, well, what does this flow look like if we had a project manager? It's like, well, what it's going to be is that we're going to have an opening of like, here are the days that are available. That PM is going to email with that mentor. They're going to lock in on a schedule. And then we're going to have internal communications where we're both going to reach out to people to say, hey, I think you should meet with this person. We're also going to broadcast it. And then we're going to let the slots and all of that get scheduled in time. So there's internal communication and there's external. And I was like, that's the right product. There's nothing in the market that actually does that. And this was about the time that like, as a VC, everything I'm reading, every firm I'm talking to is like, AI coding is like this is changing the way I'm going to do this. And I'm speaking from the same place that the majority of the rest of my ilk are, which is like, I'm just regurgitating shit that I've heard from other people. I actually have no fucking idea how good or bad any of this stuff actually is. And so those things came together, a confluence of like, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to give this a shot. And in sort of classic Aviel fashion, the way that I held myself accountable was I announced to the entire community that I was going to build that and I was going to launch it in the next couple of weeks. Okay. And I announced that before I even downloaded Cursor. I was like, we're going to do this because you know what? If that wasn't true, I can't even tell you how wildly off my entire investment thesis was, because like, you know, you're like telling founders that like they can get rid of their junior engineers, and yet I wouldn't take that on. So at any rate, like, so it was Claude 3.5 was sort of the model in vogue at the time. And so that was getting me getting started on that. And it was a mixed, interesting road that I went down. So I was like, okay, first off, this is my first reaction was like, this is totally amazing. For me as like an engineer then turned to product, the fact that I can write a spec and it can build this thing for me is like freaking amazing.
Were you using agents at the time? I remember Cursor launched them. Like,
it was not agents. So it was just like vanilla Cursor. I had to very quickly get in the weeds though with like Cursor files and other stuff, because I wanted to use GenSX for part of how we would talk to LLMs, which is a Foundation's member company here. And at the time, everything that they did was, so first off, they were before the cutoff of the training of that. They made the decision initially to be React based. And so like seriously, like it would try everything to like, it just couldn't use it.
Yeah. And GenSX is the workflow framework, right?
Yeah. So like agentic workflow patterns. So like takes a lot of the pain out of like chains of like, I want to call this LLM, have this happen next.
Makes sense.
So I found like I felt like I had a superpower immediately. I was like, this is awesome. But then as I kept sort of adding features and building stuff, because, you know, what I set out to do there was actually fairly complex. I found that, oh man, like this isn't, it's not really working anymore. Like I'm hitting the edges. And then I was like, oh, this must be what everybody talks about why it's, you know, like not really ready, and that can't be the case. But I was like, but shit, I kind of told everyone that I was going to have this done. And I was like, but when it works, it really works. So I scrapped the whole thing, which was close to a working prototype at that point. I was like, I'm going to take a different approach, which is rather than taking more of I'm the product manager, I'm going to, and you know what? It was sort of like riding a bike, because as it was generating the code, I'm reading all the code. This wasn't vibed, but I hadn't written code in so long. And so it was like, I didn't really know where to start. But once it had already done it, it was like, oh, I'm reading the code. I know this functions. I'm debugging it. I'm like, I remember how this works. And so I took the approach instead of being very opinionated architecturally around how it should do things. So rather than like, I want this to happen, I made some interesting choices where like, I don't know Next.js, like I'm not a React expert. I was like, but you know, back in my day, you know, we used to use a, you know, model view controller framework, you know, a like, you know, JavaScript in the front end file is fine. Like, let's just go. So yeah, totally. So I was like, you know what? Like, I'm going to tell it to do that shit. Like we're just going to straight up go. And you know what? For our UI, we're going to use Bootstrap, because that's what I know too. Inspiration. Yeah. So literally and so for things around like, okay, and we're going to have to do things asynchronously. So we need to build a service that does this. I want to use Redis because Redis is the thing. So like I'm picking all these things that I'm familiar with, and it kept working. And then as I was adding new features, I would be like, I want you to leverage this service, do this. And so I'm being very like you would quit your job if the engineering manager or team lead was telling you the things I was telling it. But I was very much, and this is why I was struggling with the term vibe coding, because it was like, I was not vibe coding. I was micromanaging the shit out of a team of junior engineers.
But you've been an architect, right? Like you kind of took this, like, I'm very much like technical PM architect. So this is how exactly I want this thing to do. And then because the number of variables in that type of prompt is way less than when people ask like, do vibe code like the website from scratch, just having one liner. It's a very different scenario, I guess.
Yeah, and I think even with some of that too, to think about like in building that scheduling system. So, you know, what the flow would look like is a mentor will send an email into an email address. It'll figure out what it's saying and it'll respond. And what I was like, well, let me give you like an example workflow. Let's say I'm like, hey, I want to mentor a foundations. And it'll be like, make sure that you're capable of doing it. I'll reach back out and give you some available dates. And you're like, okay, great. Set me up for this day, for this time. And it's like, boom, calendar invite, you're all good. Then that's in the system. Inside of it, it starts advertising to potential people on Slack that like, this mentor is coming in these days. Do you want to book a slot? And you chat with it. And I can show you a demo of this later of like how that works. But in my mind, I didn't say that. I was like, I'm going to build a system that is intent-based because, again, I'm going back to what I was used to. So like, well, you may call this agentic. I was like, I want the first LLM call to reason out the intent. And then rather than like, MCP magical tool calls, instead it's going to be like, based off those intents, there are X number of functions that they map to, or you hit unknown. So I was like, I was taking initially a little bit of like the first version of it was like straight up, if this, then that, except you're using the LLM for all of the edges of trying to get out the metadata and make the determination. And then once I was like, oh, I get this and I'm comfortable, it was like, oh, well, it doesn't always have to work in that order. People could be asking multiple things at once and do that. And so things started getting more complex and then truly more agentic. But I didn't take the approach of like, it's going to magically know shit that I don't know. I was instead like, based off of where I was in my career and the technology as I understood it, how can I get there? Because I think this project and this stuff would have been a failure if I was immediately asking it to do things that were just straight up above my ability to understand what it was doing and what it was putting together.
So you still need to comprehend it, like at least at the time. I mean, I'm curious, like if that changed in the past year, like since you started working on that.
I mean, 3.7 got a lot better. That was, I went from feeling like, hey, I can do this to like, oh my God, I kind of feel like a god. Like the fact that I'm a product person and an engineer was like, this is like unhinged. But I would still run into like issues with like the amount of build issues, mistakes, if it's doing things that are off the beaten path. Frankly, for me, since 4.0 and 4.1 haven't, of Opus specifically, it hasn't had a big difference, but like 4 Opus was just a transformational, like, I'm not even gonna, at this point, with this code base in particular, think all that hard about what I'm asking it to do. It just is gotten so good, and the way that stuff is built out, it will auto-discover usually the right places to implement this stuff inside of the code base. So that has been a difference, and that has let me be a little bit more cavalier with like, I'm going to take a bigger risk here and not micromanage it. But I still try to take, and I think this is just because of my own limitations, I try to take more iterative approaches where I will, rather than be like, okay, I know this is what I want to do at the end, I will work towards an incremental step. So like an example of that would be when we opened up the co-working space, we charge people, like there's desks. And so the first thing I'm going to build out is the ability for me to actually like have a desk attached to a member. We're going to send out like a manual invoice. We're going to do this stuff. And so like I get that fully built, and then I'm like, okay, what we're doing now is we're going to charge some by credit card, and we're going to take that step. And so even if I know what the full requirement is, very much taking that approach where I think in the world pre-LLM, I wouldn't do that because I'm straight up building what is going to be throwaway code. Like you are adding points to your sprint that are net negative because you know they're going away immediately. But instead here, I just found it was easier for me to take that approach and get that working, understand what's happening, and then take the next iterative step rather than take a big leap like that.
That makes sense. And then you're not doing what most people do. They just speak a lot about like what the whole product can do, like the big feature can do, the create a PRD, break it down. Like you're very tactical. Like I want this like little thing feature, another feature here. So you're very incremental in your approach. And it's been the same since the beginning, right?
Yep, 100%.
All right, maybe we can look into what Root is, and maybe you can show us what the app looks like.
Sure, yeah. So the Root exists in many ways. I'll show inside of Slack. So this is what Foundation members are looking at. Look at this cute little icon, which you helped improve. It was various versions of like ChatGPT to create the image.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's multiple people's works. I think Aviel created this one in a flat version, and I took it, put it into ChatGPT, created a 3D. Yeah, it's an amazing collaborative process.
Yeah. So Root can do a bunch of things. It can manage office hours. You can do general Q&A. So we have like a knowledge doc, which actually lives inside of Notion, that Root will query if you ask a question that seems like you want to know. So like stuff about the office, how things work here, what are the different rules. We also let you like request to create events, ask what's on the calendar. But a lot of the conversational piece that I built really was around office hour scheduling. And so as I mentioned, there's the one side of it in email, you're seeing the other side in Slack. So let's see, what are the upcoming office hours? And so this is just looking at what is already on the book, and I have tweaked the information a little bit for fun on this one. So here we go. Art, looks like you are doing office hours tomorrow. So I'll just say I'm doing 1 p.m. So this is what a member or founder in residence here would deal with. And so again, like the other side of actually booking this is dealt with email, because a lot of the people who do office hours here aren't actually members and aren't in our Slack. And so what this is doing on the back end is it's scheduling on my side, scheduling on your side, updating calendars, moving calendars. I can remodel. Yeah, you
I
should
just
have
got a invite in my calendar.
Yeah, you're done.
Wow.
It's easy. And I can cancel, reschedule. You can do the same thing. In fact, the way it's wired up too, like if you cancel the event there, you'll get a message through Slack that the other person has done it. I mean, literally, I tried to take every single use case of like the insane shit that happens with scheduling and rescheduling to be able to like get rid of that headache and not have to have a human. Yeah. And I will say like the first few versions had some problems in them, but like now it's super rock solid how all this gets done.
I'm curious, architecturally, is it all tool calls? Like all of those use cases are tool calls, or how did you structure that?
So this was where I took the approach of, so when I first put this together, there was not necessarily the level of sophistication and tooling that there is now, and I wanted to keep it to something I understand. So what you just saw here is every single time there is probably somewhere between 4 to 7 different LLM calls. So essentially what we try to do in the first one is be like, what are we trying to do here? So let's find the intent, and there can be multiple intents, because I can be like, I want to do this and I want to do this, and here's what I want to do. So it's like, I'm going to say I'm going to do that. So I'm going to send you to another call that's based off of the intent. Do I have all the metadata that I need? And here's the metadata that's required for me to do it. Can we infer it? Can we not? And if we don't, we ask a question back to the user, and we always pass back the history into the chain so that we know where we are in the conversation. And so you can iterate through. But if we keep going in those cases, it would be like, okay, we have all the information we need. So now what we do is we call a tool, which is really a local function, which is let's schedule the event and let's kick off the workers to invite the calendar and do that. Once it finishes, we get the confirmation. And then I take the list of all the intents and all the actions, and I create one unified response message that makes sense for all the action that it's taken on your behalf.
Okay. Is it like a hierarchy basically, or like how do you structure like the intent structure and like sub use cases?
Yeah, so essentially it's not purely a hierarchy, because there are certain cases where like you could jump back to try something else in between, which is like, I've now inferred this, but I think it wants you to do this. So like we're actually rescheduling, because there are cases where it's like, I think we're scheduling. And it's like, no, this actually doesn't make sense. This definitely is a reschedule. And so it'll go back. So it's not purely hierarchical, but what is funny, nothing's recursive inside of it, at least. Though I did have a really horrific bug. So the Slack side, obviously you can guess how it's built. I ended up going with Postmark on the email side. And then, so there's a webhook that comes from the server when it receives it. And I had not thought about the case where what happens if somebody emails root and CCs root on the email, and somebody for some reason decided to do that while I was driving back home from Foundations. And in those like 12 minutes from when my phone started blowing up to when I like shut down the Railway server, it sent about 88,000, I think was the number, emails to itself, and CC'd me on my Gmail inbox. I could not use Gmail for hours. It just kept flooding in. I was like, oh, I'm an idiot.
It's so funny.
Yeah, and so that's for office hours. But what we have in here too on here is we have our event calendar where users can request events. We have a full member directory. We let people do job listings, and we have that membership Bible that I've talked about. So this is sort of how all this stuff is exposed to people on that end. But like, frankly, like I think the most valuable thing here is less like the fun I have here of doing these LLM calls to create a conversational flow. The power is really in my ability to build like custom CRUD software for me to do every manual task that I would need to do on the back end here. So like everything from like our billing infrastructure for managing desk rentals, from like the weekly email that I generate, most of the, for people, most of the metadata is just pulled from what it knows inside of the system of what are the upcoming events, and that like people scheduling calendar events, making sure we have all the logic for does this work or does this not work, having an active member directory where I can sort and filter through by Slack activity, by door access, by everything that you're doing, the ability to send bulk Slack messages, bulk Slack surveys, emails, things specific people. We have two partners who help support Foundations to be able to make intros from root to them as part of people's onboarding. So like I basically just take every task where I have to do something manually. Instead of me doing that, I open up Cursor and I talk about the thing that I need to do. and we take care of it together. Oh, and I guess the other piece of it too is like we also have applications open. And so like people constantly want to be members of foundations. And so we have a whole workflow inside of here, which is totally around like our members, all the info they put in. We have, you know, conversations. I can send, there's canned responses, follow-ups. Like it's a whole, let's look at, yeah. So here's one. I'll make some recommendations. I've got my templates in. If they reply, I can reply in here. And so it's just like, this was basically like, I took what was the spreadsheet that I was using that was driving me crazy. And I was like, let's just build a workflow where all of this gets handled.
Wow, it's amazing. And this is the portal like internal for you and management, but for the foundations members, why did you decide to go with Slack? I know like Slack, the home tab in the for Root looks very similar to what you're probably going to build like as a simple portal. Like, why did you decide to take that route versus like building something like a destination for our members?
So much of this community happens inside of Slack. And so trying to create some new username, some password in a web portal at a URL that people are going to ask about versus just getting everybody used to Root, because Root will send like, you know, in general, here are the events that are happening today. You can ask for Q&A. Like you've had some interaction with it. And so it kind of becomes the personification of like, what are you going to ask the project manager anyway? And like, frankly, I remember at Techstars, we built all of these portals and other stuff for people to use. And they would just email the PM and be like, hey, like, can I do this? Or what are you supposed to do for this? And so I think it's just sort of natural for that to happen. And like, frankly, the part inside of Slack, I was thinking it was going to mostly be conversational, but I think I've come to the conclusion, like, besides the fact you see the obvious latency, like, we all just got too excited about chat-based interfaces again, just because it was fun and flexible and cool. Like, just the fact that you suddenly go from, I mean, so I spent 3 years running the Amazon Alexa Accelerator, so I was inside of there. I knew everything they were doing from, but it was like that natural language understanding world was wildly different than this. So it was like, it was really fun for me to see just like how freaking powerful LLMs actually are in being able to do what a human would do in a conversation or in these cases. But I mean, for some of these features and functionality, like the event calendar, I was like, oh, I'm going to add it as another thing to do. And I was like, that's dumb, man. It's just a form with these options. Like, why are we not just doing that? Like, this is just a better interface. And it was like, look, we're already bought it on Slack. Everybody lives in here. This is what we do. So we're going to go that route.
Okay, so there's like definitely some limitations from the UX perspective. You mentioned something interesting that everything was supposed to be a chat initially. I think like in the whole AI hype, like when ChatGPT came out, everything's going to be a chat. And I think I was more of like a doomer in that camp. So I didn't really believe that all the user experiences will be chat-based in the future. Did you think that changed also like from like the investor angle perspective, like building that product too internally? Like, do you think, what is the balance between the chat and like the custom user experience with like typical buttons, tables and all that?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge is people don't know what the hell to do. Like, you know, I think if you're someone who's smart and intentional, a chat box can feel awesome because you're like, I don't have to be in the constraints of your rigid UI. But if you're just a normal person, you're like, what do we do? What do we say? I mean, it was just like you put someone in front of an Alexa and they're like, suddenly they have nothing to say. Like they don't know what to do. And so I think it ends up being too open-ended. So I would say from an investment standpoint, because of my experience with Amazon and Alexa, I did not take the approach of the future and everything is a chat interface. But what I did take was that the fastest way to expose some of these things in a powerful fashion, and now we're talking precursor, pre that, was through a chat interface, because the cost of me adding a new feature supporting something new in a chat interface versus needing to wire up what's the correct UX, how does this fit into my information architecture, what does this look like, it's freaking free. The problem is it's not discoverable, but you can get that feature out there like really quickly. And so I think for me with doing this interface was like, I don't know exactly what I'm building yet. I don't know all the things that it's going to do. So like that made sense for that same reason. I can just turn it on. Like, hey, now Root can do this. Hey, now Root can do this. But I think what I discovered, especially as we got to 3.7 and now 4.0, like generating UI based off of patterns is functionally free. And so I think it makes for a lot of those cases like you don't need to do that. But I do want to go back to like, I think that chat interfaces are super problematic. Like I think that there are certain cases where they do make sense, which is like, it is the default, is what you would do anyway. So if I would normally be emailing a person to do this task, I think it makes sense. for it to be chat, for it still to be email and handled by an LLM. It shouldn't, like, it was always unnatural sometimes when you would feel like you were fighting against some like CRUD UI where you're just like, man, like the things you're making me input and the toggles, like this sucks. And I think but I think in a lot of cases it's like, when I think about the calendar thing, like I'm just so trained for like, if I'm like going to create an event on Luma, like I'm not trained to be like, I'm going to email Luma the event because you're going to do that and you're going to forget. Like, I forgot the location. I forgot, like, it's helpful to have the UI as part of that.
And also a behavioral change, like transforming, moving from like the SaaS world. And like, if you put everything in a chat right now, people are going to like really be frustrated and like lost. And obviously like discovering, as you mentioned, like some of these features, like what are the unknown unknowns that, how do you surface that to the user? It's like such a big challenge in a chat cell.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think the other thing you mentioned is like, great, you deployed it. How do you maintain consistent behavior as models change, as you add new features? Like, there's so many reasons why it's extremely problematic. Like, I mean, I stumbled my way into like having to think about the challenges and why you would adopt an eval platform when I was like, oh shit, like I'm gonna upgrade this to the new model, and then I'm like, it doesn't work the way that it worked before. It's like, and I was like, is of course and obviously, and that's when you start getting to the point where like, I like have not updated the model that's behind this, like, and I'm pretty sure OpenAI is going to turn it off in the next several months because I'm like, but it works currently. I don't want to do that.
All right, maybe you can show us some of the features in live coding you can do with Cursor right now.
Cool. Yeah. So this will sort of be an interesting one because it's a small tweak, and you'll see how cavalier I'm going to be with the prompt. And this works well because of the state of this code base. This would not work in many other circumstances. So one thing that keeps coming up is we have people who apply to become members of foundations or founder in residence. We have way too many applications for what we can currently handle. I try to talk to everyone that I can. So I get overwhelmed and I sort of batch when I respond to people. But I've realized it's a pretty awful user experience for people to not hear anything and then suddenly hear something 3 weeks later. So I want Root to respond after they send an email with another email saying like, hey, we hear you, we exist, we'll get back to you in a few weeks. Just set up an SLA. So got a little prompt here. So after a user submits a membership request, we should respond with an immediate email letting them know that we are currently at capacity. You can look at the template canned emails for inspiration, and we'll get back to them. Within the next several weeks. So a few things to call about why I wrote it this way. Like, I was super cavalier because I know that right now it's smart enough to know what I'm talking about for membership requests based off of the code base. When I email, there is very specifically an email service that every email goes through, and it's very legible in the code. I don't even need something in Cursor rules or anywhere to pull off. It knows what to do. But where it's not necessarily going to be smart is coming up with, in my opinion, of what to actually respond with. I'm being super lazy here because I'd rather edit what it says, but so I'm pointing it to templates and canned emails that we have done before for inspiration. And so, like, seriously, something as simple as this will probably do the job. So okay. Let's go for the dopamine hit of what's going to happen here.
Is this still happening for you when you like wipe code every time? Like, do you get so excited about the output?
I mean, yeah, because it's like you have, it's like this mixture of like pulling the slot, and at the same time, like I still get the reward of I feel like I built something. It doesn't feel like cheating because there's still the act of like, I look at the code, I get to feel it, I get to deploy it, okay. And I'm like, hey, this feels good. Mm-hmm. And so, like, you know, here, obviously I could have been much more specific. I probably am costing myself, like, I mean, because I'm using 4.1 and doing it like this, I'm probably costing myself like $1.50, okay. $2 to be able to do that. But I really don't care. And so if we go in here, I was right. It knows that there's a process membership request. It found the correct function for what happens. And it essentially knows what to do. So it's going to generate that service for us.
Generating, I'm curious if you played with Claude Code, because sounds like everyone pretty much switched to Claude Code in Cursor. You're like probably the only person I know that haven't done that.
So yeah, well, I'm the other person who hasn't done it. And the reason why is that this works for me. Like, my day job is I am not a software developer. Like, I am a office manager, venture capitalist, whatever. Like, and this has worked well enough for me. I think that I will probably give it a shot for the next large change that I need to make, but I want to have time. Like, I've been destroyed this. When my kid gets back to school and I have some more time, like, I think maybe that's when I'll give it a shot. Because, like, candidly, I think when I started with this, I was probably putting, you know, between 20 to 30 hours a week in building. And now it's very reactionary around like stuff sort of works. It's not top of my list. But I think at this point, what I've taken from the Foundations community is that nobody uses Cursor anymore here, at least. So, I mean, it's just wild how quickly that happens. Because I remember what it was like when everyone here started using Cursor.
Which was less than a year ago, right? Like everyone was using Copilot. Like, yeah, I think Cursor came out with a big update around summer last year. And it took the whole Foundations by just probably a couple of weeks, and everyone was using it. It was crazy.
Yeah, and I would say, like, going back to what we touched on earlier, like I think I was somehow simultaneously a skeptic and believed too much in the power of what it could do, if that makes any sense. Where I think from a skeptic standpoint, it was like, it can't actually be that good. I mean, I remember the first time I was using 3.5, I was like, okay, this is kind of nuts. Like the fact that it's taking all these extra steps and doing that is like kind of blowing my mind. So I was skeptical, but I was also at the same time, I think I felt that what these tools were capable of was for very active, very seasoned developers. It was going to accelerate them in the same way that like a Copilot does. We go to like IntelliSense to Copilot to that. And instead it feels like the early versions of Copilot were a lot more like IntelliSense versus what this is to that early version of Copilot. Like this is a whole step function, but for me that was enough. It was like a good version of that. In my heyday, I would have operated 2 times faster. I was not expecting like 10 times faster.
What is going to happen to software development in the next couple of years? I know like the models are maybe, in my opinion, close to like medium level engineer right now. Like what happens in the next 2-3 years? Are we going to be out of jobs?
I don't think we're going to be out of jobs. I think it's like every time we do things differently. I mean, my age is probably showing, but like, you know, when we went to, you know, like compiler runtime languages, people are like, well, this is such bullshit. When we move to frameworks, everyone's like, well, what do developers do? Like, that's just never what happens. The job changes. I think probably the biggest impact and change is going to be that what really mattered was lines of code, and now it is business logic and opinion. And I don't necessarily think that means that like the prompt is the source of truth, but really what it means is like, what matters more is because if you think about it, we went from like ones and zeros to this isn't really legible to like, I'm just sort of writing in English. And it's sort of a next logical step that there's another layer of abstraction on top. And I don't know that we found that. I don't know what that's going to look like, because I do worry about like long-term maintainability of code bases, because it doesn't make sense to not move fast when you can move fast. But what does it look like when the code base isn't all in the humans in the company's heads? Like, but it just feels like maybe there's one layer of abstraction on top, because I feel like you shouldn't care about the code as much anymore, but you should care just as much about what the code does. Okay. And there's a tension between that, and you can hear that in the words that I picked there. And I think we don't know quite what that looks like yet, but I think that's not the end of software engineering. I think it's just a transformation, and perhaps like a good one, in the sense that like I have kind of always hated the wall that's existed between product management and engineering. And as somebody who has been in both worlds, I never understood how it's like, how are you a product manager and you don't know how to write code? And I'll be like, how are you an engineer and you don't know who our user is? Like, it's always felt broken. And I think what's sort of interesting is the majority of my career was spent with that being the case. So I thought that's just the way it is. But I think maybe where the change goes is that, is it possible that that was just a temporary moment in time? Because if we go back to like the early Microsoft era, the other stuff, like there weren't PMs. It was the engineers, because it was like the engineers are building, and then we ended up with this. And then maybe we go to like, we're back to that, except it being the engineer. It's like one person can actually do all these things. So maybe that's the change, is like that job function of I'm just an engineer who just cares about the code was just a moment in time. Because again, frankly, going back to the 90s, to the 80s, like, that really wasn't a thing either.
All right, cool. Maybe let's see what happens with Cursor.
Let's see what we did here. So I again, just showing my age, what I actually like doing is,
I haven't seen that for a while.
I love just pulling up GitHub desktop to be able to see what we ended up doing here. And so here is what we did. So it hooked into, it hooked into the membership workflow here. And it looks like what we are doing is we are sending a membership auto response if we are successful. You know, I probably would have nested that a little bit differently, but that absolutely is going to work for me. And let's see what it added in here. We added that inside of the controller. Love to see that. Here is our test, which, you know, who cares about tests? Well, let's look at the email here, and that's pretty funny. It ended up deciding to format it because I've told it I want things to be formatted previously, like it looks like in Gmail. Yeah. So it did this for us. Hello, first name. Thank you for your interest in foundations. Taking time spent your current capacity. There we go. That's what I expect. And so I think what should be awesome is here we go, membership auto response, and it's being intelligent enough to go right into the send direct email, which throws it into a queue, which throws it into Redis, and the worker sends it. So that'll end up in here. And yes, I did have it build me a dashboard so that I could pay attention to all these things as they happen. And so,
will it work?
It should work. Okay. So let's give this a shot. Oops, what am I doing here? Too many windows open. So let's just YOLO this.
Oh, you're going to deploy. Okay.
Oh, I'm deploying. we're going to
Is it going to be a preview instance or live instance?
No, we're going live.
Oh, wow.
Well, I just looked at what we did. The only thing that we risk building here, like breaking with the code that it touched, is people not being able to actually submit applications, except the way that this actually works is when you submit an application, it goes into a Notion form, and then the Notion form has a webhook call. So what I just sort of surmised is that there's no reason to not YOLO this, because the only thing that could be broken is that it wouldn't actually be sending the webhook in. So we would still be collecting their data. Everything will be fine. Really, the thing we have to worry about is if this thing goes live, does it send the wrong email? Does it send a dumb email? So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to QA it right after I deploy. And, you know, we get what, like, depending on the day, like 2 to 10 membership requests a day. I really doubt that one will come in the interim. So we're just going to go ahead and do it live.
All right. I think we have the app running.
Yep. So the app is running. We're pulling the logs from production. As you can see here, that's actually unrelated. That's taking door events. So hi, Matt Shobe. He's here. So let's join the community. My name is Aviel Ginzburg. We're going to do the other guy email. I don't think that does validation. That's not required. Whatever. If you're going to, you know, actually send an application, please do better than this. Hello. And boom. Oh.
And this is, by the way, it's Notion form, right?
Yep, this is just a Notion form. I'm still running off that same Notion form. At some point, I should probably do something better. Okay, we are submitting. Got it. We'll be in touch with next steps in the coming weeks. So it gives you that message, but that's not as nice as sending something personal. So let's take a look in my inbox. Are we going to get an email? Why don't we check the logs here? Okay, it has processed membership request. So that's in there. And whoa, here we go. Thank you for your Foundations membership application. All right.
Wow, that was easy.
And we have a new feature that makes my life easier.
I'm glad this interview was helpful. Just wow, this is amazing. I want to switch gears a little bit because you've been on the investment side, on a venture capital side for almost, I guess, 10 years. And this dramatic shift that happened since ChatGPT launched, like everyone's building an AI. It seems like there's almost no company that right now that is not using AI or less like not pitching AI as their core value. I'm curious, like this experience for you building Root, building all those essentially community OS and using all the technology. How did it change your perspective on investing?
First off, I just want to say that like the future is always unknowable. So I think what I try to focus on is what are the things that I know that aren't going to change, rather than like come up with a thesis of here's how the world is going to change. Like it's just too hard to do. So let's take a step back and like, what are the things that I think are not going to change, which is like businesses will continue to have humans. They will. Humans enjoy talking to humans. Go-to-market matters always a lot more than you think in terms of product and engineering. And there's a lot of risk in being too cavalier as a mature company with iterations of your product, bugs, and mistakes. So let's just leave that as some of the things that I know are true. Now, there are some things that based off of what I've seen from AI that have changed stuff dramatically, which is like the pace and ability for you to crush through your roadmap, build features, build product, and ship product is 10, 100x faster. And so, you know, what that means is like those old days of like fighting over backlog. Can we do this? Can we not do this? Like you should either be in a like, we need less people, or we should be shipping a lot more mode. So that means my expectations of what companies can do is much greater. But at the same time, I also recognize in certain industries, you can't be cavalier like I just said. But you know what you can do is you can use a lot of these things to build software that automate your internal workflows, your internal processes. And so when I think about how expensive a company is going to be to build, what the challenges they're going to have operationally are, I completely think about that differently now in terms of where they can get efficiency and where they don't. And in fact, like a lot of businesses that were previously unattractive, because you're like, man, the overhead of like a lot of the bullshit manual work you have to do dealing in this vertical or with this customer, I'm suddenly like, oh man, like the amount of stuff that you can now automate away, which I was able to automate away, and I don't know why you can't do that yourself, is crazy. And then additionally, when I think about like what companies build, like historically your products that you build are an emergent property of the structures of your company. And then the campaigns, the marketing, the other stuff, it's usually not just the people, but also the tooling. And when you exist in a world where you can build software, you can build tooling internally that maps more directly to your business and how it functions, like it leads me to believe that like smaller teams really have opportunities to compete in outsized ways in markets that before I'd be like, there's no way you're even going to be able to make a dent in this. Like you can act like a huge, like we have a portfolio company who's like, we're talking tens of millions of revenue, like less than 50 employees. Like I know it's not the 2 people because they actually have salespeople, but it's like an insanely small but mighty like team. Like when I think about like what that business would have looked like in the SaaS era with like something be like 500, like, no, not 500, like 200 people, you know, like something along those lines, or 300. So that's been wild to watch. I think one thing that I am afraid of is like the pace of actually writing software is changing so quickly that like I did a lot of investing in like cloud infrastructure, dev tools in the last wave. I'm really afraid to do that right now, because at least back then the moat was like, well, maybe you did something valuable that even if it didn't take off, someone else is going to buy it. There's some enterprise value. Like here, stuff moves so quickly that it could just skate away from you. Like you like our whole company is about RAG. It's like, it's what? You know, you have cases of like, I mean, man, like even like vector databases, like the amount of venture that went into what is just now Postgres is completely wild. But those are like 2 examples. There's other stuff in terms of like, how do we write software? How do we maintain software? What do we do? Like it changes so quickly that if I'm trying to think of a 10-year vision, I'm just like, someone's going to be really right. Someone's going to make a ton of money. There's always going to be the Cursors of the world. There's going to be the Windsorts. Like I'm not saying that these are bad companies or bad investments and people should do it. For me as a $50 million fund who doesn't see everything and can't like I'm just like I'm shooting in the dark in those deals. So it's just like I'm just not going to touch that stuff. And like, you know, we invested in companies like Auth0 and other stuff in that last wave, but here I'm just like the pace of like I'm just staying away.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it means that I'm curious how across the portfolio and the companies that are scaling, and it means that they have a like the ratio of engineering versus go-to-market is changing. Do you see that change?
Interestingly, I think the ratio of go-to-market versus engineering is actually getting, there's more engineering to go-to-market, but there's also less engineering. So a lot of what I've traditionally invested in has been like B2B SaaS. And so how you take the product like that to market is like, there's founder-led sales in early days, engineering, building stuff. And then it's like, okay, we found some market fit. Now it's time to scale. And so what happens? You raise some money to double your engineering team because you're like, we're going to get a bunch of juniors and stuff, and they're going to do all the features that nobody actually wants to build. We're going to let the good people work on the cool stuff and forward thinking. We've doubled the engineering team. Woohoo. Okay. But now we got to go to market. Okay. So we're going to have an inbound motion and all this stuff. So we need a new head of marketing, a new head of sales. We need a sales lead. We need an ADR, like an SDR team. We need some AEs. Okay. Inside of marketing, we've got the product marketing person. We got the like, and so like all that stuff just like starts to balloon like crazy. But I think now 2 things happen. One, expectations changed of like, you need to like hunt for what you kill is no longer an unreasonable ask for people. But at the same time, you give them so much tooling that an individual on the go-to-market side can have such a bigger impact than they can with previous tools and previous organizations. So I think everything just gets to be smaller.
Okay, go back to the conversation earlier about VC and VC that builds. I think you have a very unique position in the market. I'm curious if you think that every VC should be building software.
Every VC may be a strong word, but I would say I don't understand how, if you have not written and shipped code in the past 6 months in this moment in time, you can credibly evaluate any opportunity that monetizes from developers, from infrastructure teams, from engineering teams. This isn't like, I always had this fear of, part of my superpower as an investor was that I was still operating. I was still an operator. Like, a lot of these great investments were like, I use the tools. Like, I'm familiar with this. I've had these. I'm still dangerous. I'm still relevant. And I can look at a company and be like, I understand this. I understand why that adds value. And I could naturally, even forget LLMs, I could feel the drift as I got further and further away from being an operator. And so I felt like I needed to stay. And so, like, I would always do that. So like with sort of, say, like transformer models, so say pre like large language models, which I was like, okay, I'm just going to lock myself in a room for a week and I'm going to get this stuff running locally. I'm going to play around with it. And then, did the exact same thing for Stable Diffusion. And like, I need to at least understand. But I don't think people have understood the way in which software development has fundamentally changed. And I think that doesn't mean they don't understand how disruptive it's been. I think they do, but they don't understand the nuance because they just haven't done it. So I don't know how you could underwrite an opportunity beyond just looking at GitHub stars that might have been bought, or some stupid blog post. Like, and I think it's also lazy, man. Like, this is not hard to do. And especially if you were in product or in engineering before and you're not doing this, then I ask, like, why do you do the job? Do you not love this stuff anymore? Like, how could you not? Like, this is the most fun time. And if you don't have the time to do this, like, why should your LPs trust you with their money? Like, you're like, what the hell are you doing? So yeah, that's my 2 cents. I think there's absolutely no excuse to have not at least have a side project or to do something. Like, you have to understand what's happening.
It gets so easy to build right now. I'm curious, in your opinion, what are the things that are harder actually while building a company right now in 2025?
Man, I mean, the hardest thing has always been people and humans and go-to-market and sales, and like aligning the needs of a user with a buyer and trying to navigate that entire process. Like, that has not gotten any easier. And in fact, like, because everybody is throwing some AI slop at you that is like, whether it's we're AI native, we're this, we added this, like, there's so much noise that I think it is a difficult time as a startup if you're selling to other businesses for like, how do I rise above the noise? How do I matter? And in the fundraising market too, I'm seeing this with the portfolio companies are going to raise next rounds. It's like a world of have and have nots. It's like, if you're on fire, people are backing up a truck. Like, I mean, dude, like 6.5x. There's a company that put it on a note, and there were some issues with the wire or whatever. By the time I wired, they had already signed a term sheet to raise at a 6.5x higher valuation. So I literally like put the money in the account and then immediately got to mark it up by 6. Like that, there's that. And then there's the like, got a good business. We're approaching $1 million in ARR. Like, we doubled year over year. And people are like, I don't care. I don't care about you at all. Like, I hate you. Go away. So I think it's like, it's a really bifurcated, challenging fundraising market for a lot of folks. There's a lot of noise as you're trying to go to market and differentiate like who you are and what it looks like. And so I think those are challenges that come with this. But at the same time, like, anyone can build product you can ship. Like, the challenges used to be like, hey, Aviel, I need $1 million I've got this great idea, this great business. I just need an engineer. Like, now that's not like the challenge is not your ability to build. But like, look, there's distributed systems challenges and other stuff that are unaffected by this that are just, really freaking hard. There's user experience challenges that, none of this really helps solve. There's like, a lot of the best businesses come from insights of like deeply understanding very illegible workflows that a random, Stanford dropout has no idea that this nuance thing actually exists. So like in those ways, the world remains the same. And like, frankly, as like a regional VC, those are a lot of the things that I like because, I love those like unsexier businesses who are going after something that is not obvious. And I think to build on that as a final point, there has never been more obvious ideas right now. And it's just like, it's because we have this new tool. There's a new hammer. And I think there was like the saying before, which is like, whenever you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But interestingly, right now, so many things are nails for that hammer because there was a first wave of digitization, but now there's all these businesses that you look at and you're like, how has this not been disruptive? And the answer is usually that like it's prevented itself from getting disrupted because it doesn't want to be. It doesn't want to get better. It doesn't want to get more efficient. But whenever there's a full step change function that you can't ignore, stuff like that starts to happen. And so you look at all these industries, like anywhere that there's a middleman, it's like there's a million companies that are tackling it. And it's like, and you're like, good. And so that's, I think, both great, but that's also a problem because an unfortunate reality I've learned over, now at this point from like the first deal that I was a decider on, we're now like 13 years in. So much of success is just luck and out of your control. And that if there's just a lot more people that are tackling the same problem, even if you have the best execution, even if you're the best human, you could still just freaking lose. And so I think with that, I've always sort of hated extremely crowded markets where you don't have an edge to squash everyone out because it's just like, you can just get unlucky, man.
Yeah. And then from investing, it doesn't mean that you invest more in the team in early stages because like it's so easy to build. Okay, so like there's a bunch of engineers like want to tackle some of the markets, like one of the niche markets, like for example, you just been describing. So what does actually like how does your evaluation criteria change because it's so easy to build right now?
I mean, I would say like one mistake I made as an early VC was coming from a product background. I would get excited about products and I would imagine myself as the person building and making decisions and as the founder. And then, woke up to the camp of like, really, you're investing in a person. But then over time realized that that's also not true. You're investing in a person and you're investing in an opportunity space. Like the best person in the world, if nobody cares, if the category doesn't exist, doesn't matter. So I think what I try to look for is like, your product, the first thing you build is really just going to be a vector for you to discover what's the thing that really matters. And so I look for where is there the biggest possible opportunity and who's a founder with the ability to build and execute. And if I like that person, I like the way that they think about tackling the market and there's enough adjacencies in a large enough market, that's functionally what I'm underwriting and get excited about. But like zooming in on the exact thing that they're building, like that's not enough. When I get excited about just a founder and like a product or an opportunity, that's not enough. It needs to be like, I love this category. I love like that plus founder needs to be a thing.
Makes sense. All right, last question. If you were to start a company right now, what would you build?
Man, if I started a company, I would not start a venture scale company. Like, I think that I would be focused on how do you get a lot of non-technical businesses who are going to be stuck for a really long period of time on legacy SaaS, pre-SaaS. People had these IT teams and these internal IT teams. They would build, like they had to stand up your mail server and host it, and they would build your website and they would build your internal apps. And then they all lost to SaaS. And then the IT team suddenly became the like neckbeardy guy, the guy who just restarts your computer, that's not what those IT teams were back in the day. And now I really do think we're in a moment where like you can go in there and you can build just like what I did for Foundations with not a lot of work for a lot of these like, because every business, especially small businesses, are shaped slightly different. They're forced into one size fits all software or into way too expensive configure. We thought this was going to work. What the fuck did we just do? Bullshit. And it would be like, how can you build a business that just goes in a more consultancy fashion to a whole bunch of those different businesses and you do services work and then you maintain the software over time? I think you could make just an absolute killing going into like everything from like freaking pizza chains to like, it doesn't matter. Like there's just so much opportunity there.
Awesome. Yeah, this was a great conversation. Aviel, thank you for coming in and sharing some of your insights from a VC background, but also, how you built this incredible software for Foundations.
And just deployed live to production.
Yay. All right. Thanks again.